Hello once again everyone, and happy November. So we here at RCH like to do a little thing every November that is known as Shanksgiving. Now Shanksgiving will be an actual course that I'll be running in the school for my students where we focus on Dagger because I have a very dark sense of humor, but one of the things I've kind of flirted around with this idea for a while. I think now is the right time to make this video. I want to talk about my particular approach when it comes to being the aggressor with the Dagger as opposed to the defensive party. Now the reason I want to talk about this is because, number one, when it comes to how to attack with a dagger, most sources are relatively lax. Now it's not to say that they don't still describe it, of course they still showcase the way the attack is coming in. Sometimes they'll even give more detail of they're going for here versus they're going for here. And in the case of things that are more like, hey, we're writing literally just about dagger fighting, or usually more about, let's be honest, small-ish sword fighting, then they will give more details. But for the most part, advice from that perspective is limited, especially when it comes to fighting against an unarmed opponent or another person using a dagger, or just in general if you have the advantage. So I figured I'd go ahead and talk about this a little bit, my approach, and why I wanted to talk about it is because more recently I was up at WAW and I got into some dagger fights, in armor specifically, so meant to be dagger fights. And armor is very, very good for informing how you should be attacking. Because unlike when you're just in gear and you go, haha, I got you, right? You need to actually make the stick count. So, firstly, let's talk about just general approach. Number one is that when it comes to being the aggressor with the dagger, both grips are of course good. I much prefer to stick to a sword grip. If I have the initiative, sword grip is going to be where it's at. Couple reasons for this. Number one is that I find it personally easier to draw that way. Once it is in my hand, I find this easier to then defend against bigger weapons. The other reason is that most people practice against the ice pick grip at some point in their training. It's a very familiar position. It's not necessarily all that hard to deal with, and it's also not very hard to deal with once you're in armor, because if I overcommit, I'm here. He doesn't worry about getting slammed like that. If it doesn't go into the right spot, it glances off. So I do prefer sword grip for my aggressiveness. Sometimes I will still do ice pick. We'll get to that in a second. Second rule is the dagger never starts my motion. Never ever do I just extend dagger, because if I'm close enough to do that, I should be close enough to be doing something with my left hand. Now the things I'm going to be doing with the left hand are going to vary. Generally, if they have a dagger, I'm controlling their weapon in some way or warding it off. This could be as simple as I know they're going to try and stick me in the upper shoulder or in the armpit, and I will just put my vambrace or my arm in relation to that. And this is also what I do when I am unarmored. Because I don't care if I get hit there. That's not that important. I do care if I get hit here or here. So my arm will be here, and it will be ready to guard whatever it looks like they're looking for. If they are in a sword grip, then I'm usually keeping my arm a little bit lower. If they're in an ice pick, I'm usually keeping my arm a little bit higher. Now, if I can get my hand onto their weapon, that's an automatic go. Alternatively, if they are not holding weapon or I've dealt with it in some way, it's locked down or it's past me, I will immediately go for the back of the neck is my preferred grip. Now, that's not always going to be available. I'll also grab shoulder, the cloth around there, things along those lines, but generally getting what I refer to as a swan neck, where I have basically my fingers are curling over, I bring my elbow to the middle of their chest. This allows me to exert force inward against their chest while pulling their head forward. This doesn't crane the neck either, by the way, it just collapses their structure. If I can get this, not only do I have them locked in, and this is a pretty difficult grip to get off of you once you get it on there, but it also is now starting to line me up for what I want to do next. I don't have to extend my arm all that far anymore to hit target, versus if I'm grabbing out here, that is still my full arm length to extend to hit, so not preferable. So that's my first approach, right? Is number one, sword grip. Number two, left hand always leads the way. There are exceptions to this. If they should attack first, then absolutely I may lead with the dagger, but in those cases, my offhand is usually doing something defensive, and I'm looking for more along the lines of a counter shot. This isn't necessarily all that common in earlier styles of dagger fighting. Usually it's the idea of block then hit, but especially since my rapier experience, I find I'm not bad at hand parries and quick shots back, so it varies. I usually only stick to unarmored when I do that though. Now, third rule is I'm going to alternate targets. You always want two targets in your mind when you're being the aggressor with the dagger. I don't want to go, and now I'm going to stab his armpit, 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 because you might get the first one, you might get the second one, you will not get the third one. Once they get locked into where your arm comes from, they're going to stop you in some way, shape, or form. And adjusting from someone stopping you is way harder than just keeping the pressure up on them. So what I mean by this is essentially think of this in the same way we drive with the sword, right? I don't want to be going head, 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 over and over and over again. Now they're starting to deal with head and I try to hit them somewhere else. That in theory works, but the problem is if they're going for me here and I have to now readjust and do a new opening, that's me having to think on the fly. What I want to be thinking about is head, chest, head, chest, head, chest. I've gotten them into 2 openings. Now I've got them predictable head, chest, head, head, right? That's where I want to be thinking. Always kind of ping-ponging around between 2 openings with a 3rd ready to go if need be. In the case of Dagger, in particular when it comes to thrusting, because for the most part, armor you're only going to be thrusting, and for the most part I prefer to thrust as opposed to cut, but we'll talk about that in a second. My priority is always going to be hip slash the nards, and then neck. That's where I like to go. I have never found someone that I can't get those on. So what I do is, again, lead the motion with the left hand, get that grip. First one's going to go into hips. They will then be dropping their arm to protect themselves. Second one's in the neck. Boom, 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 boom. And I will alternate between them. Now what's nice about this rhythm is that you can start changing it. Boom, 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 boom. You can start messing with that. You can start adjusting around their guard, because once you start getting that float going, they know exactly where you're trying to stab them. They have no choice but to try and defend those 2 openings like I was describing before. I get them floating, and now it's very easy for me to plant those 2 targets. Then it's time for my 3rd target. Okay, they're getting pretty used to this. There's my armpit. And you just start flitting between those 3 targets. Alternatively, you can also supplement that 3rd hit with crotch, neck, got them floating, crotch, neck, throw, because now they're worried about something else. Now, in regards to main targets, like I said, waist, crotch, armpit, neck, even unarmored, those are still my priorities. I don't want to be trying to go into the sternum. I can just raise that up to be a bit more underneath the sternum, so more of a gut shot as opposed to a crotch shot. Face, it's there, but ergonomically isn't necessarily all that great. I'm cranking down on their head. Getting that shot is relatively close, and if they miss and I miss, that could actually end up very bad for me. So instead, I do prefer to keep it further out to these 3 points. If I choose to go onto the other side, it's mostly going to be from distance, so things along the lines of quick cuts at the hand, quick cuts at the face, which these I will lead with the dagger, and those are usually going to be very opportunistic, right? Dagger comes in, there's slice, grab, stab, of course. Alternatively, dagger comes in, parry, cut. Little quick hits like that. The advice that George Silver, for example, gives for, and yes, I've said the dreaded George Silver on the internet, George Silver recommends in his one little bit on alehouse dagger fighting, cut whatever's closest. That's generally how I approach it. If you're going to use a cut, it's just to hit whatever's closest, usually with a quick retreat, and that will generally do you pretty well. Now, some other things to be aware of is, of course, let's talk about ice pick grip. For the most part, ice pick is not my preference, with some exceptions. Number one, how you transition from one to the other. Out of armor, it's very simple to do. Little bit of practice, which, let's be honest, the second you own a dagger, you've already started messing around with that. The best way I find to transition grip is to go ahead and use your left hand to help, and this can actually be done while attacking somebody. If I'm in this and they're starting to clear my grip, they're starting to get used to this, I'm worried about them coming back at me, I can now use this as a block, using my elbow kind of on them to get my hand waving, to deal with whatever they're doing. Transition, now I can change that grip as I go. Alternatively, if you just slide your hand forward, you're now in ice pick grip in the other hand, which can be quite nice for working the same angles, but they might not necessarily know that you just changed grip. Downside then being that you are stabbing left-handed. Now, for the most part, handedness doesn't matter with daggers. It's all kind of symmetrical, but your throws are still relation to your hand, as is his hand. If you are a right-handed person, going up against a right-handed person, you're both working on standard lines. You switch to left, now your defense is against his offense, meaning that you're going to either have to go crossbody or make him go crossbody to get the correct attacks. Also be aware, if you are a right-handed person, generally what that means is most of your sword-based throws, most of your weapon-based throws are going to be left side, because we're working on their sword side. If you are more of a grapple-oriented person, you are probably used to doing things on your right side, meaning that there can be that flip-flop between what you are comfortable with. I am happy to say that I'm kind of down the middle line. I fence just fine with both hands, and I like to grapple on both sides. But certainly, if there's a weapon in my right hand, I will default to left side throws. If I have no weapon, I will default to right side throws. So there is that consideration to take into account. But anyway, back to ice pick grip. The main thing you're going to focus on here is your attacks need to be simplistic, and they need to be tight. The big mistake I find people make is that they stand in guards like this, or they threaten like this. You're in a dagger fight. Don't bother threatening. The time for threatening is over, right? If you're going to attack, it's just to make it as quick as possible. Think of this in the same vein as to the shoulder cut. Not, I'm going to stand to the shoulder, I'm going to think about it. It is load, go. Same idea. My dagger's low, my dagger's protecting me. Up, boom. Just as immediately as I can. Up, boom. Just through whatever target. Now the angles that I will work here is I like to go, of course, into the clavicle. That's the standard. That's the pretty go-to one. It's also very easy to get people to make mistakes. They start bringing their left hand up, you can go over. You can maybe get the armpit shot, but more often you can transition across, and that's where you're going to get shots into the right armpit, maybe into the hip, maybe into the crotch if you're lucky. There's a lot of different things you can do there, so I like to use this to then work underneath. Alternatively, one of my more preferred shots is from this position. I'll stand slightly right foot forward, so I can do it from left foot forward. I'll step back and go into the right side of the neck from their perspective. This one's quite nice because if it misses, one, you do have a cut option, but that's not really the priority. You're now on their dagger side, meaning that you can then keep working from there. Final shot that I like to take is a rather subtle one. This is one I will only do if I'm unarmored. If I get into that swan neck position, either defensively or I've wrapped them up or something along the lines, but I'm here, to get my dagger effectively into target, I have to bring it up and down, something along those lines. And I don't want to try and get this at this distance. This is not very effective. If I am here, I pretty much am now telling myself I have to throw. The historical thing to do correctly is to smash them in the face with your pommel, then throw them. Even with the rubber daggers, we don't like doing that. It's not very nice. So a nice alternative to get them reeling is just that quick 8 cut. And all I'm doing, again, don't even care if there's an edge, right? I just throw my elbow forward, give them a nice little wick up the middle of the face. That also very quickly clears my dagger. I can then get a reliable hook and throw. They're now reacting to it. Maybe I can work that inside angle. There's a bunch of things that this little space creator can get you. It's also just a very good way of reminding someone that they've gotten way too close to you without much issue. So, all that is to say, when it comes to being the aggressor with the dagger, which can be a couple different scenarios. Maybe we were fighting with longer arms and I have pulled first and he is working on transitioning to closer range. Maybe we are practicing and I am being the assailant, he is unarmed. Maybe I was the one who was unarmed, just got that dagger off of him and I'm not giving it back to him. There needs to be that certain level of competent aggressiveness, because otherwise you're being disingenuous in your training, you're being disingenuous to your partner, and when you're in an equal dagger fight in armor, which is probably the most likely place where you're going to go dagger on dagger, you're going to be in a big trouble. You need to be ready to work it, you need to have a plan, and you need to go from there. And all of this, again, is just fencing knowledge. This is all built off of the standard stuff I do to people when we're using whatever sword. It's just now adapted for that slightly more medium range, with grapples being more on the table. But I do prefer to avoid the grapples since the dagger is really good at working in this space, and if you can add using your left hand or offhand to create little bits of space to continue working with that weapon, you will do much better than, I'm going to do one stab, that didn't work, I'm going to try to throw him, and then you're on the ground. Either way though, thank you very much, Bob, and thank you all very much for watching. Happy Shanksgiving. We'll go over some other techniques another time.